Good evening and welcome to the Ombudsman program. My name is Diane Wellborn. I'm the Ombudsman and I'm going to be your host for this evening's program. Tonight we have an exciting program featuring the Miami Conservancy District. The district is celebrating its 100th year this year, so we have a bit of history to talk about, but then there are lots of activities that are bringing us right up to date in the activities that they are involved in with our Conservancy District. So I'd like to begin by introducing my two guests this evening. I have with me first Kurt Reinhardt, who is the Chief Engineer of the Miami Conservancy District. Thank you for coming on the program and welcome.
Thank you.
I also have with me tonight Sarah Hipplesteel Hall, who is the Manager of Watershed Partnerships, and we will get into exactly what those partnerships are a little bit later. But welcome and thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Yes. And I'd like to remind our viewers that this is a call-in program. So if something that we're talking about sparks a question in you, or if you've had a long-standing question about any of the activities of the Conservancy District, please feel free to call the number on the screen and we'll do our best to get your questions answered. So without further ado, let's begin because there's a lot to cover tonight in 1 hour, 100 years. So here we go. Can you give us, please, Kurt, a history of the Conservancy District? How did it get started?
Well, the main reason we're here is because the 1913 flood, which is 102 years ago, so we just recently commemorated 100 years since the flood. That was the worst natural disaster in not only southwest Ohio, but throughout Ohio. Caused devastation to the cities, not only Dayton, but from Pickwood, Hamilton, all along the Great Miami River. More than 360 people died in the flood, more than $100 million in property damage. That's $100 million from years ago economy, so several billion today. So it ranks with major devastation, flooding. The communities came together and said, we've had flooding before, nothing like 1913, but this is an ongoing problem. We need to fix it. And that's where they brought in Arthur Morgan, who came up with a plan for what we now know as Miami Conservancy District, with dams and levees and channels and floodplain preservation to manage the water so it doesn't flood the cities.
Great, thank you very much for that succinct history. We were provided an interesting graphic, first of all, of the Miami Conservancy District, so I'd like to show that to the viewers right now. That would be graphic number one for us, and this is showing the logo of the Conservancy District. So as you can see, the guests tonight are also wearing that emblem on their clothing, so when you see that out and around and on literature or out and about, you will know exactly what that represents. Would you like to describe any more about the logo?
We just redid our logo to help celebrate our 100th, and it represents our three main mission areas of preserving, protecting, promoting, and
wonderful. That's great. Good. It's a lovely logo. Then we also have a graphic number two, which shows to the viewers a scene of the flood. This is the scene of Main Street. I'm sure you're familiar with that one. You can't see it right now, but the viewers can. So it is showing Main Street during the flood of 1913. Is there anything else you want to add about that particular picture?
If you look at that, think about Main Street with 10 feet of water in it, right. and that flooding was more than a mile wide. So over in the Oregon District and then other neighborhoods where we're at here in North Dayton, this area was underwater. So it was an incredibly large area that was affected by the flood, right. And very deep flooding too.
Very deep, very scary event. And I think the next couple of graphics that I was provided show how scary and how fast it all actually happened. I think that we've got the slides 3, if you'd like to put that up for us. It shows the water in Maple Street at 6 a.m. All right. Okay. Anything you want to add, or do I move to the next?
Very briefly, Maple Street was in the area where Sinclair Community College is now, in the western part of downtown. The graphic, the photo at 6 a.m., you can see water in the streets. So that's the Tuesday morning, March 25th. That's when water was just coming into the town. So at 6 a.m., water in the streets.
And I'll have the viewers note that the water is in the streets, but the steps to that home are visible. The steps are still there. But if you show the next graphic, yes, you can see that we now at 8:30 a.m., which is just 2.5 hours later, what has happened?
Now you see the water is up covering the porch. It's in the first floor, so probably 4 or 5 feet of water in 2.5 hours. That shows how rapidly, and think about also throughout all of downtown and the neighborhoods near the river. So it's coming up very quickly.
Very fast. And then the final graphic that we have on this particular point shows at 11 a.m. only the second floor.
Right, and that's the point where everybody, your first floor is gone. People have fled to the second floor. Sometimes they're in attics, even on the rooftops. The water at that point is 11 to 12 feet deep above the street level in 5 hours.
Wow, that's an amazing, horrible flood. Thank you very much for those dramatic graphics. It's very, very good to show them. It kind of brings it home. It's exactly how fast these things can happen. Let's move to talk a little bit about the role of Arthur Morgan, because he was extremely instrumental in solving a large problem, not only for our area, but a system that's been emulated elsewhere. So please tell us a little bit about him.
Arthur Morgan was a self-trained engineer. He was very interested in solving problems through engineering, through social change. He had his own engineering company in Memphis, Tennessee. He came to Dayton to look at our flooding problem. He came in about 2 months after the flood. He was invited to Dayton. He looked not only at Dayton, but up and down the valley. And he truly believed that you had to control water at the source. You had to manage water and not just build up defenses against it. He proposed a system of dams and levees and channel improvements, which nobody had ever tried. A lot of people said this was a radical, crazy idea, but he worked through it and provided all the details to convince not only the community leaders but experts that this was a good plan, and made it happen.
What were some of the parts of the plan that were more unconventional or radical?
One of them, 100 years ago, was using dams to control water. Dams at the time, primarily for either water supply or irrigation, and nobody was really using them for protecting against flooding. You have to remember this is only a few years after the Johnstown, Pennsylvania disaster, where a dam break wiped out the city and caused major devastation. So dams were not, especially dams upstream of cities, were not a real popular idea. But Morgan showed how our dams were designed and built much stronger than the one that was in Pennsylvania that caused a problem, and the fact that they were dry dams, so they didn't have a reservoir to hold water all the time. It was just for flood storage only.
Okay, very, very good. Are there other innovations that were a part of the construction of the system we're proud of today?
I would say there was quite a few, probably more than I can come up with right now. One of them, each one of the dams has what's called a stilling basin, which is basically a pool downstream. When the dams are storing water, the water is rushing through the openings in the dams at a very high velocity that could erode the riverbed and the channel downstream. So they needed a way to harness that energy and slow the water down. And they do that with what's called a hydraulic jump, which is formed in the stilling basin. That's something that had been observed in nature, but nobody had ever designed and built a structure to actually cause it to happen.
I see. So that was another innovation, that still
used commonly today, but
wow. And all of this was happening at the time when we had a war going on, right?
Yes, of course, World War I was 1916, 1917 era, which is when we were forming. We were formed in 1915. That's when they were making all the designs and plans. We actually delayed start of construction for about a year and didn't start until 1917 because of the war, shortage of manpower, shortage of metals, materials. They just tweaked the design and made the design better and got all the documents in order to pay for it, and then in 1917, 1918 actually started construction.
Okay. And so there was available equipment, or did they have to improvise or wait on equipment because of the war effort?
The finding equipment was very difficult. Anything that was useful for the war effort went to the war effort. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of construction going on because the heavy equipment was going to the war effort, whether it was building and improving Army bases and, for the first time, air bases. That was a new innovation for the war effort, not only here but also in Europe, where they were gearing up for the war effort.
Right, right. I was also was interested in the Arthur Morgan's use of principles of social democracy for the workers that were building the dams. Can you comment a little bit about the communities that were created in order to support this effort?
Yeah. Arthur Morgan was very much a social. He believed in improving society through social changes, and one of them was building small communities. At the time, the model for worker camps was from the railroads and the minings of the 1800s, where itinerant workers came in. They worked. Once payroll came around, the alcohol and the gambling and all the other vices took over, and people usually disappeared or left. Morgan did not believe this was a good way to do business. So it was really not only improving the plight for the workers, it was also a business reason that at each one of the dams, which were away from the cities, he built small communities. His wife designed the houses, and they provided modern, at the time, very modern hot and cold running water, central heat, sewer system, just nice housing that encouraged people to come, live at the dams, go to work, bring their families. So they had a school system for the communities. Each one had a clinic, a store. Each one was self-governed. So each dam project during construction had its own community that was dedicated to not only building the dam, but also providing a safe, healthy place for the workers.
And do we know much about what happened to those workers at the close of when the work was done?
We really don't know. As part of it, we do know that the schools that were in the communities, they taught evening classes for the workers and for the adults, including what's now known as English as a second language, because a lot of them were immigrants. So they taught English. They taught things like basic finance, bookkeeping skills. They taught things like carpentry and electric. So not only did they work on the projects, they got skills that they took away with, whether they stayed in the area and went to work for growing industries after the war, or whether they went on to other construction projects, we really don't know. But when they left, they did have very good skills.
Oh, that's good, and it had improvement. And then finally, on those earlier days, how was this funded in the middle of a war effort, and in that day and time? How was this construction financed?
It was all paid for locally. So the communities that suffered the floods, that suffered all the damage, also paid for the project. And this was done through assessments on the properties. So if your property flooded and is now protected from flooding, you have a benefit of the flood protection being there. And so we have an ability to do assessments as paid with your county property tax, that based on the value of your property and the depth of flooding determines how much your assessment is. And so they sold bonds to pay for it, but then these assessments paid off those bonds by 1950.
I see. Well, that's a very, very good return, isn't it,
Yes.
for all of us in our community. Well, thank you. For anything else on the history before we move further?
I think that probably lays the foundation, and that's what got us started. It was completed by 1922, so 9 years after the flood. it was in place and working, and has worked ever since.
Okay, well, it's nice to think about those days on your anniversary of your district. So, can you talk about the extension of the flood protection efforts into land stewardship? Both of you on this one, and the role that the Miami Conservancy District plays as a steward of land.
So all along we have purchased land or helped control land along communities so that besides the dam and levee system, that our natural floodplains are still along our streams and rivers, helping to provide what we refer to as non-structural flood protection. And so in doing so, many miles of riverbank are preserved and can also be enjoyed for recreation and other things.
Great, good. Well, we're going to come back to some of that recreation. What are perhaps some of the better known or more popular pieces of land that the Conservancy District owns that many of our viewers may not be aware that you own?
Probably the easiest example is the metro parks at Germantown, Englewood, Taylorsville, and Huffman, all here close to Dayton, because we own a lot of land at the dams, and it's land preserved for temporary storage of floodwater, so it can't be developed. We don't want people living there or building anything. We want to preserve for flood storage. From the very beginning, Arthur Morgan advocated these should be parklands, and MCD in our early years had them open to the public, and in the 30s worked with the CCC and WPA, the federal government work projects to develop park areas. In the 1960s, when at the time was the Montgomery County Park District, now known as Five Rivers Metro Parks, when they were formed, we formed a partnership with them that they manage what's now the metro parks at the dams. So they manage our properties for us. They do a very good job of the recreation, the conservation, the education that is kind of beyond the scope of what we were doing. So we have really great park system that a lot of the land, not all of it, but a lot of it is based around the dams that is the land for preserving floodwater.
Okay. So a lot of the Five Rivers Park districts that people enjoy they're actually on Miami
Right.
Conservancy District land.
Yes.
that can be used if we have a flood or if we have a near flood or whatever.
Exactly.
You touched on it a little bit when you talked about the construction, but can you tell us basically how a dam works?
It's actually a very simple concept. The dam is a large embankment of earth that crosses the valley that has openings, we call them conduits, which most of the time the river flows through as if the dam wasn't there. So the dam does not hold back waters most of the time. As the river starts to rise after a big storm or snow melt, when the river is coming up, then the conduits are sized to only allow water to pass through that the cities downstream, the river channels, can handle safely. The rest is temporarily stored behind the dam, and then over time it empties back out again. Okay,
very good. And also, you mentioned a stilling basin earlier, but what is the difference between a dry dam, a stilling basin, and a retarding basin?
Okay, the retarding basin is all the land upstream of the dam that's set aside for storing the water, or
which is now parks.
Retarding the water.
Yes, okay.
Yes, a lot of it's parkland, but then there's land on upstream that's mostly agricultural. So that's land that's preserved for temporary flood storage.
Right.
The dam is basically the barrier that forms the retarding basin, and then the stilling basin is a part of the dam that harnesses the energy of the water to slow it down.
Okay, very good. That's good to know about that. And how are these utilized in our entire system? We must have many of these different forms.
We have the 5 dams. I mentioned the 4, Germantown, Englewood, Taylorsville, and Huffman. We also have Lockington Dam in Shelby County that's in the upper part of our watershed. Each one is an earthen embankment that has the same basic design, has a retarding basin, so they all function the same way.
And they all 3 have the same types of basins, and they're
Yes.
all 5 are built in the same basic plan.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And Please, I wanted to ask about the levee accreditation system, and how FEMA uses that levee accreditation system to draw floodplain maps, which sometimes questions come up about these floodplain maps because of insurance coverage, et cetera. So can you talk a little bit about that levee accreditation?
Okay, hopefully I can make this brief. FEMA produces the flood maps for the entire United States. For all areas they've identified flood areas that is used for insurance purposes and also for development purposes. So they want to identify where a flood risk area is, where you shouldn't be building, or if you do live there, you need to have insurance. About 10 years ago or so, the maps were getting very old, and Congress passed legislation called map modernization. Basically told FEMA, we're going to give you enough money to update the maps all across the country. As they started updating the maps, they realized there was thousands of miles of levees that FEMA really didn't know anything about, and they didn't know if these levees were adequate for providing flood protection. So they essentially told levee owners, such as us, that if you wanted your levees accredited, you had to analyze and prove they met a series of criteria saying they do provide adequate flood protection.
Okay.
So MCD has been analyzing levees and submitting reports to FEMA and getting our levees accredited.
Okay. I'm probably going to come back to that just a little bit, but I'm being told that we have a caller. So caller, we'd like to welcome your question for the program. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
What a big program. And what wonderful history we have here. It's fascinating to learn about. Making me proud to live here and find out the history of the way we've conserved our resources. I have a two-part question. First, that history. It's been published anywhere, and there's some place you can direct me that I can go read it. You mentioned it, and I can't get quick enough.
Okay, let me just ask, is your question about reading more about the history of the development of the district?
Yes, and especially everything that was done after Great Flood. And the second part of my question has to do with the Inglewood Day. It's right up there now, around Dogwood, and maybe you've already said it, how that is, but as a chance to enjoy those that lands up there, just curious about what's going on.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe I've got your questions, even though our connection wasn't that great. But we'll get those questions answered for you right now. I think the first one was about further information about the history of what we've been talking about, how one can read further about this. And then the second was the story of the Inglewood Dam, which I think there was water and now there's not a lot of water behind the dam. I believe I got that. Is that what you heard? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, the connection wasn't
Yes.
good. As far as the history, if you go to MCD's website, which is mcdwater.org, we do have basic history information, and then of course, I'm sure there's other things on the internet or at the library. I think there's some good books about the 1913 flood, about our history and how we were formed.
Thank you. Good.
As far as Inglewood Dam, I take it he's referring to there used to be a Lowhead Dam upstream of the big dam.
What I heard was that there used to be water, and now there's not water behind the dam.
Okay, probably the
lake. That's what I heard.
Yeah, in the park area upstream of Inglewood Dam, there used to be a fairly large lake. That was excavated. That was the material that was used to build the dam, to build Inglewood Dam. So it was basically a large borrow pit that they dug a big hole in the ground to use it to build the dam itself. In the 1930s, one of the CCC, I think it was, camps was at Inglewood, and they built a small Lowhead Dam across the Stillwater River that diverted water and filled it up, and it became a lake. And that was kind of the center of the Metro Park there at Inglewood, was the large lake. the dam in the river not only diverted water, it also diverted sediments, and over time, most of the lake filled up. So the lake is much smaller than it used to be because the sediments accumulated through the years.
I see. So this is all a natural
Right,
occurrence.
it's just a
It just
natural
naturally
progression.
occurred. Okay.
So it was a man-made excavation that nature filled back up again. A few years ago, Five Rivers Metro Parks removed the small dam from the river that diverted water and basically converted it into a much smaller pond and an active wetland. So there is still some water there, but it's very shallow, and there's also some large areas that are now more characterized as a wetland, and it's extremely popular with bird watchers.
Oh, yes.
Lots of bird species love that area.
Well, that's good to know. And to the caller, if we didn't quite get your question answered because we might not have heard it correctly, please feel free to get on the district website and follow up with them as well. So, okay. I was very interested in the Observer Participation Network that I read about, and that you have data collected by individuals up and down the streams that are participating. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
You want me to keep talking?
Okay.
Yeah, we work with, we collect precipitation or rainfall data throughout the entire watershed, which is parts of 15 counties in southwest Ohio, so it's about 4,000 square miles from Indian Lake to the Ohio River, a very large area. Knowing how much rain we got and where it's falling and how fast it's falling is important for predicting what the river's going to do. So many, many years ago, we established this precipitation network where we work with, many of them are private individuals, a lot of them are farmers that have large tracts of land, so they're very interested in how much rain there is, and we just work with them. They do daily or hourly rainfall readings and give that information to us. Sometimes we work with like a small community. They may have a rain gauge at the city building or someplace, but through that we have a number of observers, we call them, throughout the watershed that provide us the information on rainfall.
Okay. Are you looking to recruit more observers, or do you have enough right now helping you?
I think we have good coverage.
Okay.
When we have somebody retire or no longer desires to do that, we ask
You have
for,
to go look
yeah,
for
we
some,
find
look
somebody
for
new.
look for another observer to come in there. Okay, I'd like to also ask about the role of the district in preserving the groundwater and our surface water. I'm sure you cooperate with all kinds of partners in doing this, but I'd like to ask you to tell our viewers a little bit more about your role in that part.
Sure, we have worked on a broad range of water issues for all of our 100 years, not just flood protection, but over the years we have responded to community requests for assistance related to lots of different water topics. And so we have established programs now that worry about, or I should say, look after groundwater issues and surface water issues, rivers and streams. We do a lot of quality monitoring, so what's in our groundwater, what's in our rivers and streams. We do a lot of quantity monitoring, how much water is in our aquifer, are we going to have enough for the needs that we have, and also what good shape is, and also how much quantity is in our rivers and streams, and we use that information for a variety of different programs to help our communities make good management decisions about how they're using their water, where they're getting it, and how they're treating their land to make sure that the water stays in good shape.
Wonderful. How does does the district cooperate with entities like the EPA and the Department of Natural Resources? How do you all cooperate with those agencies that have a similar mission or share the same goal?
So we do have some similar goals, but we do work locally and have a lot of local partners. We tap into state agency programs sometimes for funding assistance or technical assistance. We partner when we do have shared goals and work strongly with those people to get the job done for our communities.
That's great. Are there any particular projects that you'd like to share that you're partnering with right now?
Right now we are partnering with, we have several exciting things going on. We have a partnership of 15 different communities along the Great Miami River that are invested in a study of the quality of our river, what's going on in the river, and how that impacts then those communities' ability to meet certain state requirements. And bringing 15 communities together can be challenging, but on this topic, they're all working really well in a partnership, and then that's helping us better understand what's happening in the river, and it's helping us better understand what we should be doing to make that river healthier in the future.
Oh, that's good. What have been some of the outcomes of past partnerships with the river? What kind of actions or advice have been concluded from such partnerships that maybe viewers might not have ever known that this was going on?
Years ago, the main pollution issue in our rivers and streams was untreated human sewage.
Yes.
This was decades ago, before a Clean Water Act ever existed. We helped communities partner together. We helped construct wastewater treatment plants so that the water would be cleaned before it reached the river. And so for years we managed several community wastewater treatment plants. In the late 80s, we divested those back to the communities that they're in. But so we've been building these partnerships across communities for many years to try to improve our rivers.
Wonderful. Good. Can you tell us a little bit about the data set? Is this part of this community, the data set that you maintain about the water? Is this also part of what's used by your partners?
We have a lot of data, of course,
Okay.
Some of it going back 100 years, some of it going back farther than that, actually. And we use it, of course, precipitation data to understand and our flood protection system, but we also have a lot of quality data on our rivers and streams and groundwater. We publish reports. We help get that information into communities' hands to interpret what's going on over time so that we can all make better management decisions about our water.
Right, good. That's wonderful for all the communities to get to know that. Do you utilize volunteers for any of this data set collection as you do for the precipitation?
We have used volunteers over the past occasionally. We've had some groundwater data collectors. We've had some, we train volunteers how to monitor river water quality. So we have had volunteer opportunities, yes.
Okay, that's great. What about your role? You have miles and 30 to 40 miles of trails throughout Montgomery County. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the bike trails or the trail system and how you all are collaborating with others on that?
So years ago, we began to build bike trails because the river corridor, the levees were nice and flat and perfect for adding a recreational element. And so we do personally manage about 30 miles of those bikeways, but they interconnect with over 300 miles in this valley. We have the country's largest off-road paved trail system. So the 30 we manage is just part of the big picture, and our communities all manage pieces of that. That's the bike trail system. We also manage the state's largest water trail system. The Great Miami River, the Stillwater River, and the Mad River are all state-designated water trails. It's over 270 miles of places where you can go fishing or put your canoe or kayak in the water and enjoy the river.
I believe that we have on the graphics that are going through, we have the covers of each of those brochures about the water trails. Those are available, I presume, on your website for people who want to take a look at those.
You can get both our water trail maps on the website and the access to the bike trail maps, but you can also on our website get an interactive water trail map, and then MiamiValleyTrails.org has an interactive bike trail map.
Okay. And what other types of publications are available on your website that our viewers should know about if they have not already looked?
One thing that's available that, especially for the history buffs, we have thousands of photographs of when the dams and levees were being built, including the construction camps we talked about. They did a very good job of documenting all of the construction. So if you're interested in how Taylorsville Dam was built, if you go onto our website and there's a thing that says construction photos and you put in the keyword Taylorsville Dam, you'll see hundreds of photos documenting the entire construction, or any of the dams or at the levees in Pickler or Troy or Franklin or Middletown or Hamilton, Dayton, wherever. There's photo documentation of when it was built. So we get a lot of positive feedback from the people interested in the history.
I'm sure you do. Yes, I'm sure that those are very actively used. And do the water trails need to be updated a lot? Does the water trail change as the river changes, or does it basically flow the same way?
So the water trail isn't the river itself. The river changes maybe a little, but not a lot. The water trail is a set of publicly accessible sites.
I see, places you can go in.
And so yes, it changes all the time. Access sites get added, access sites get upgraded or removed, and so every year or so we try to make sure that those maps are up to date. That's why the online map is nice, because that map can be instantly updated and stay up to date, where the printed maps, so things are changing. And our communities are investing in their riverfront. Communities have, in the last couple years, invested over $100 million in riverfront recreation. And so lots of great new amphitheaters and parks and trail amenities are all getting added to those maps.
Right, it's exciting to watch that, isn't it? Yes.
The communities love their riverfronts.
Yes, they do, and I think that's just wonderful. What, when we talk about monitoring and these types of things, what type of pollutants are we most concerned about now? Are there certain things that you all are looking for?
The thing that we've been monitoring the closest, or I think a lot over the last 10 or 11 years, is our nutrients. Okay. So nutrients, nitrogen, and fertilizer, they come from places like agricultural runoff, urban runoff, overflows of wastewater plants or septic systems. So they come from a variety of places. And nutrients are definitely one of the things that the rivers are most impacted by in our region, at least. And so our communities have all gotten together over the last few years and designed a program actually to reduce the amount of nutrients that run off the ground from a lot of different of these places.
Is that a significant challenge to do, to reduce the nutrients, or is it something that steady progress can be made on?
The challenge is this is a very large area of land, and there are many different landowners. And so while we know how to solve these problems and address nutrients and get them reduced in our rivers, it's just dealing with so many people that, yes, there is steady progress, but slowly.
Right. I'm not sure I did ask the question, even though the map, the watershed area has been showing, but how many miles are we talking about? How many miles do we have of the waterfront within the watershed? What area of land are we looking at?
About 4,000 square miles
4,000.
in Ohio.
Okay, all right. Well, that's good to know. Thank you. And I also read that you have a board of consultants that you can turn to when you need to. Would one of you like to comment a little bit about who these special people are and how they help us in the Miami Valley?
Okay. And this is another Arthur Morgan innovation.
Okay.
Yes, we can step back and briefly tell the history. When Morgan proposed the flood protection system, there was a lot of critics that said, this will not work, this cannot be done. Rather than fight with them, he invited the top experts in the field from the government, the U.S. government, from academia, and from consulting, engineering consulting, many which were the loudest critics saying this is a bad idea. Brought them to Dayton and convened the first board of consultants and presented the ideas and worked through very detailed technical aspects. And by the time all their meetings were over, the consultants, they had recommendations of how you might make it better, but endorsed, said this is a good plan. So we didn't just come up with the idea, we brought in experts to tell us what's good and what's bad. Since that time, we have continued working with a board of consultants, and they may change based on the topics or whatever, but we, last year in 2014, we convened the most recent board of consultants. We brought in 5 people from around the country that are all top experts in various engineering fields, and basically once again went through in gruesome detail some of the things we're working on, not only on the dams and on the levees, the technical details, but talked about things like riverfront development and working with the cities, and got their feedback on recommendations we should be doing for things as diverse as concrete monitoring and concrete repair, to modifying levees, to working with communities to make sure the riverfront development not only is good for the community, but also is good for the flood protection.
All right, very, very good. So they're still they're still used today, and they're still contributing.
Yes.
And you would then decide whom to invite to the board of consultants, depending upon what the issue is that you need top minds thinking about.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, and how we talked about how it was funded back in the beginning when the levee system was all created. How is it funded today?
Essentially the same way,
Okay.
the same assessments that back in the early years paid to build the system. Now those same properties and cities pay an assessment for ongoing operation and maintenance. If you build something, you have to take care of it. You can't just let it go, or you're wasting your original investment. So today we do a lot of maintenance, inspection, and capital reinvestment to keep the system working properly and keep it relevant to today's standards. So that same assessment on the same properties and communities that paid to build it also pay to maintain it. That's for the flood protection. We also, some of the other things we talked about, like the recreation and trail system, there's a separate assessment that just cities that have trails or other amenities, so not all cities pay for that, but we have a special assessment just for that. For the groundwater protection and some of the water quality, there's an assessment that counties pay for, specifically for the monitoring and the studies and everything for our water preservation. Legally, these funds cannot be mixed, so what we collect for one specific area pays for that.
For that specific
function.
area, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about the floodgates that they're seeing, the floodgates that they're seeing in some of the pictures that are rolling? Many may have observed them and have seen them as they've visited the dams, but talk a little bit about how that's monitored and the responsibilities that you all have with respect to those.
Okay, there are, and the purpose of the floodgates, they're on storm sewers in the cities. So all the cities where we have levees have storm sewers that drain the streets and carry the water to the river. When the river comes up during a high water event, the water could back up through the storm sewers and flood the city. So you have to have a way to positively close the storm sewer, and that's the function of the floodgates. There's approximately 200 floodgates throughout our system that require operation when the river comes up. Not all of them get closed all the time, but on an annual basis there are certain floodgates that we do have to close. We do have caretakers assigned to each dam in each city where we have levees, and part of their responsibility during high water times is to close the floodgates when necessary.
Okay. And those floodgates, the maintenance, do they last for a long time before they have to be replaced?
They are very durable, but
Okay.
they,
Like
again, it's a
anything.
man-made structure and it has moving parts, so you have to maintain it. We have a crew that every year does a thorough inspection and maintenance of the gates to make sure they're operating properly. If there's any problems, to fix the problems or schedule. We have had to do some replacement, but for the most part, it's ongoing maintenance.
One of the questions that I was asked by one of our staff, who's an avid bike rider, is why are the bike trails built so close to the river that sometimes they're underwater? You're smiling like this is not the first time you've had this question put to you, but tell us about that.
Probably the main reason is when the bike trail system started, that land was available. Until the 1970s, you had the river channels through the cities that was mowed grass, but very underutilized. Some people might walk in the area or maybe go down and go fishing, but for the most part, the land was not being used. And that's where the idea, and it started in both Troy and Dayton, let's build some bike paths along those areas. There's a lot of connected green space that can be better enjoyed. So that was kind of the start of developing all the amenities and recreation along the river, is because there's a lot of land connected that is preserved for flooding. So let's bring people here and make better use of it.
Okay, great. And what are some of the most frequent questions that you find yourself answering about the work that you do?
Talking about the river and how healthy it is. Actually, the Great Miami River is one of the healthiest rivers in the state.
I'm glad you said that.
It is, and despite the fact that there are issues that we all can deal with, make it better, that we do have a very healthy river system, and so that's nobody wants to live next to a polluted river or recreate on a polluted river, and so we have this great resource. We have the Stillwater River and the Mad River are very special as well, and the Twin Creek, which runs through Germantown, and the Germantown Dam is actually the third healthiest stream in the state. Mm-hmm. And so I spend a frequent question is asking me about how good are the rivers.
Right, right. Is there a particular reason why that river is the third cleanest? Is it less nutrients coming into that, or is there a particular reason why that one is?
The Twin Creek, probably because the amount of land that's along the creek is protected green space. And so there's a filter or a buffer there between whatever land use is happening and the creek itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm sure people are glad to hear your answers, that the rivers are clean. Do you also advise on what normal citizens and homeowners who are not landowners beside the rivers, what can they do to help, if anything, to improve and help river quality?
I think we always advise that anyone with a private well get a regular test on their water so they know how their own private well is doing, because there's no filter on there, there's no testing otherwise. But everyone else, we tell them to get to know the rivers and enjoy them and go to parks and be on the trails, and because if you appreciate the river and love it, you're going to be more likely to do things to protect it.
Right, right. Very, very good point. And do you get the same question, or do you, as chief engineer, do you get a different set of most frequently asked questions?
Probably the most frequently asked question is, we built these dams and levees back in 1920, and what do you do now?
What do you do now?
And the key thing is it's a man-made structure that needs tender loving care. It needs maintenance. You have to inspect it. You have to identify where the problems are, and you have to fix the problems. If you just built the dam and walked away, you're really causing more risk to the communities than if you never build it. Because if you build a dam and then something happens and the dam fails, that can be catastrophic. So you have to make sure that whatever you build, you take care of. Technology has changed tremendously in the last 100 years. Yes. I don't think we have to say that. But there's a lot more knowledge of how the dams work and the foundations, the embankments and the spillways and everything. We have a lot better analytical techniques. We can do computer modeling that Arthur Morgan and his staff could not even have envisioned. Right. So using today's technology and today's knowledge to make sure that the dams and levees and the whole system not only works properly, but the most effectively, the most efficiently that we can make it. So we have to do the inspections, we have to reinvest, we have to upgrade, just to make sure that what we've built is the best it can be.
Right. Is there a particular area that is coming next for review and perhaps improvement? You must have a cycle which you go through all of these. Would you like to share a bit about that?
Probably what's upcoming right now is concrete rehabilitation.
You mentioned that earlier. Okay.
If you look at the dams, the big concrete structures, you can see a lot of deterioration, and people say, is this a problem? What's going on? We have done a lot of inspections. The surface damage of almost 100-year-old concrete, it's a lot of spalling and cracking and everything. Structurally, they're still okay, but over time, if we just let it go, it can get worse, and it's like a bridge or a road or any other concrete structure. It looks bad today. It's still safe, but 20 years from now, if you have not addressed it, it may become unsafe. Well, we never want to get to an unsafe condition, so we are looking at rehabilitating concrete and upgrading those structures so they perform for the next 100 years.
Okay, all throughout our system, then every bit of it.
Right.
A lot of our sister cities have had a lot of rain coming in. South Carolina has hit. But do you have any comments? If we had a huge amount of rain coming, what are the things that the district would be looking at for us to protect our whole region?
I think the good news is we have our system in place. We are hopefully better prepared. We have among the highest level of flood protection anywhere in the world. We're very blessed what our ancestors did, but we have to be prepared still. And that's where we look at the precipitation, we look at the stream flow, what's coming, and it's during routine events, it may be what floodgates need closed. But as it gets larger, we do collect data at the dams and levees in the foundations to make sure they're functioning properly, that we don't have a problem. There's a lot of training for our staff. We cooperate with, like, the Ohio and local emergency management agencies. If it gets to be a very large flood, they have to know what we're doing and we have to know what they're doing. So there's a lot of communication, a lot of planning. We have emergency action plans for all of our dams and all of our levees that our employees know. In this instance, this is what you do, or this is who you communicate with. So there's a lot of planning going in to be ready.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask for you to give our viewers your website and your phone number, please. And we're getting close to the end of our time. So would you tell them how to find you? We have had the website up, but we want to make sure people do get it.
Our website is www.mcdwater.org.
Great. All right. Phone number to call?
Our phone number is 223-1271.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Now we have just a few minutes left, so any final comments from you, Sarah? Something that I did not ask you that you want to say?
I think we covered
Okay.
it all.
All
Thank
right.
you very much for having us.
And to you, Chief Engineer.
I just
remarks.
think it's important to let everybody know that, like I said, this is a very high degree of flood protection. Because we have this in place, it's allowed the cities to grow and to thrive and to come back and embrace the river. So if we didn't have our flood protection, we likely wouldn't have the bikeways. We likely would suffer flooding. We'd have problems. The cities may not be where they're at today because ongoing flooding. Because MCD is here working with the communities, we've done all the water quality and preserving. We have a fantastic aquifer system that you have to know what's going on, you have to protect it. And because MCD is a water-based organization that's watershed wide, we're working with the communities. So there's just a lot of things that I think our region is blessed with because MCD is on the job.
Right. Well, thank you very much for being on the job. And you have a large amount of territory, both land and water, to deal with. And people here do love our water system, so thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our viewers tonight for watching the program. Please feel free, if you have questions, to check out the website, to call the Ombudsman's office, or to call the Miami Conservancy District directly. Thank you very much. Good evening.